I think there was a time I used to call it theatre making for a while, for quite a long while. And then I stopped seeing myself as an actor, but more as a performer. And then I saw it. So if people said, "What do you do?" I would say, "I make performances." But in my own mind, I see myself more firmly in what's called theatre. I suppose it's the point of view. But because my body, the only training that it has had by way of any training is Kathakali. And Kathakali, as we know, is dance and theatre, is dance theatre. So when I'm acting, I'm moving, unlike the actor. And I think that's why I was more comfortable with the word performer. So I think I'm a performance maker. But I very often collaborate with other people. Like I may collaborate with a cinematographer or a filmmaker, and they will come in, but they take their camera and they come into the theatre space with their camera. So it's not about taking steps towards filmmaking, but the camera coming into the theatre space. Or a sound design. I just made a show here. My last show that I made was I asked a musician who works with a band, with a rock band, to come into the space. And I didn't realize it would be such a long journey where he then takes his first steps into theatre. How do we re-find music in the context of theatre making, which is quite different from the way they may make music when they are in a band? Firstly, I suppose I should make it clear that I never go into making a performance saying I'm now going to make it around gender. It isn't such a well predetermined idea. You pick up an idea, and I suppose because I am who I am, a political minded contemporary woman who reads the newspapers every day, so I go into performance making with that head and that body. But I'm not thinking in my mind that I'm going to make a feminist show or a gender, principally where gender is at the center of it. I don't make those decisions. My decision is about making a performance. But very often these days I get called to perform on, let's say, a protest stage where some issue is and I'll get only a day's notice.
So do you improvise in those circumstances?
Yes, so then, now this has become very interesting for me, but in terms of theatre, how do you go on stage tomorrow? But how do you go on stage where everybody else will be making speeches, but you must go there with theatre? You must go there with your art form. And I'm very interested that theatre goes into places that is not usual. So I have two heads working. One, of course, is the issue at hand, but very importantly, where from the theatre. So I'm quite careful that when I close my eyes and I think about, how should I get into it, it's not with the idea of protest, but it's with the idea of what touches me. Because in theatre, when you make theatre, you've got to think about what is it that touches you, and where do you get the first spark from, which may not be overtly political. Also because their event is political.
Okay.
Yeah. So usually if you've seen me on YouTube, it's already because they have come together to mark a particular issue, and in there I am also presenting something. So it's partly that. Actually, it all depends. Most of the time I like to enter this space with no idea and to see what's the first thing that will come, and then every day to build a little bit one on top of the other, a bit like brick over brick over brick over brick. So that you are constant, because I have no director, I have to be excited by something. There's nobody to throw an idea at me and say, okay, Maya, go and work with this. I have to excite myself, and that's most of the challenge. In the old days, I would start with reading maybe a short story, keeping it somewhere at the back of my mind, playing some kind of music that I don't know very well, but moves me, pushes me to move in the space, and then to re-find the elements of that story as I recreate it or refine it. So that could be one way. Sometimes I call somebody who I don't know too well, but I've had a nice conversation with them, and they may be a camera person or a sound designer, and I say, come, make some sounds and let's improvise together. And from that dialogue, something emerges. Now, the tricky part is every improvisation I have to record because I have no memory. And the really difficult part is after you've done 3 or 4 improvisations, then you have to watch them. And I hate watching myself. It's terrible for an artist to watch herself. But then you watch and you say, what was I thinking when I was making that action outside? What was going on in the interior? What was happening in my mind? And then I make notes about that. And then, after about 5 or 6 days, you have no more patience. So then you start pulling out chunks. From day 1, I'll take the 5th, minute 5, and from day 2, minute 10, and you put it together, and sometimes then I will re-edit it and put it on my computer to see what flow it has. And so the shape of the show will come from not something that's already in my mind, but what is coming off from these different improvisations. These days, I think it's more indirect because I don't teach in a drama school. Where I was teaching in my university, that was more about drama for education. So it's not training people to become performers, but how can they use drama for school children, for any kind of educational purpose. So they get very excited by these possibilities. But in terms of performance, where I feel it makes a mark, like I made a performance again in a very short while called Walk. And it was, Now when I used to play that in the beginning and even now, after the performance is over, usually young people will come to me and say, how do you do that? How do you make a show like that? And I find it very good because there's something in their response that says, we can also do it. Because the form is very simple. It's actually just a beat, and you're just being in that beat and you're letting your mind flow in a context. And this letting the imagination go while you're bound by rhythm is something that, of course, we got from Kathakali. And I'm only refining it now. For me, Kathakali travels wherever I go, I think. So these young people are also responding to this. They feel that the form is very simple and yet it seems to speak a lot. And they want to get hold of it. I don't know if I'm the best person because I haven't really followed it that carefully, but some of the landmarks one has been, I was around, like when Chandra's whole body of work started unraveling, one saw it from the beginning onwards. If you're talking about, and when I was a child, we just saw a lot of classical. So my mother would take me to and when that seeps in, it's quite interesting actually when you look back, when you have seen so much Bharatanatyam and so much Odissi and you don't understand what's going on stage because you're a child or you're a young college girl, but it's get into your consciousness, and at the same time you're also dancing Kathakali. And then many years later, when you become a viewer, you're already very refined, I think. The eyes become extremely refined. So when you see someone like Chandra, now Chandralekha is interesting because she had stopped dancing herself and she was seeing dance as it was playing off bodies on stage, and that's very unique. Most of the time, in terms of more, not contemporary dance, but classical dancers who are on the modern stage, if you like, they held the dance themselves, like Aditi Mangal Das, and they were trying to they were trying to look at their forms with their own modern mind now to sit in the form. And for me, I would respond more to classical dancers who are trying, who seem to be going deeper into their own form and finding, the deeper you go into that's why they're classical. The more you go into them, there's more to be pulled out. And I find that really exciting. So, but very often you are finding people who was sort of more from the exterior playing with the form. And then it's kind of what we call skin deep. It's not drawing me into the interiority of an experience.
And what about the very radical contemporary? I mean, the more...
No, some of it is really quite exciting. And they're also responding to issues, but they're responding from a dance. It's not just totally responding to an issue, but they come back and they're looking at their dance and what is it about the body and where does art meet this? How do we... So, I mean, I suppose for an example, I'm looking at Mandeep's Queen Size. And he... So when a contemporary performer, they now like to do this work in progress. They will make one iteration of the work and then they'll call some people and say, give us your responses. And then you respond, then they go away. I mean, there are not too many dancers like that, but when I go to such exercises, I find it very exciting because I'm really not a dancer, but then they're calling for your responses. And then you have to really fight with yourself and say, now what? How do I say something that will really help them? So there's some bit of this, come to a work in progress. Now, in theatre, I've not known that, but in dance, it happens. And I think it is there's something different in the way of performance making in dance that you call people to a work in progress. I think there's a lot of struggle, even now, in the contemporary dance scene, is what I'm sensing. I don't see that much now, but I feel it's just not being adventurous enough. And it's not being, but again, I don't like to be quoted because I still feel I haven't seen enough. But from the little that I've seen, I think there has to be far more rigor. That if you see yourself placed as, let's say, simply mover and in this contemporary world, then you have to go much deeper. In fact, I haven't picked it up seriously enough, or there hasn't been the time, whatever, but now this young musician that I found in my last show, I want to start working with him. It's also about, I do find that there's something about generations. There is something, we made shows, or we thought, or we saw life differently, and there's a way in which younger people approach music, or approach life, or approach, let's do something. It's different. And I want to be challenged by that. And I want to know where is that meeting point. How can I get this musician who plays the guitar and a bunch of young people, how can he and I together throw things at them that will challenge them to make and take away and make it their own? I don't want to be anybody's director. I just want to be able to make it possible for them to open doors for themselves.